It's a good question. I think the lesson that you learn in that point is no matter how challenging of a time that you're in, that time will pass.
Welcome to the Leaders Agenda, a monthly podcast designed to elevate your leadership impact. I'm your host, Tarja Huuskonen. As the CEO of Action for Results, I have spent much of my career helping life sciences leaders build future capabilities. But how does one do that in a world that is not predictable? How do leaders tackle extraordinary circumstances for which there are no recipes? And with all the pressures, how do we as leaders maintain healthy habits for ourselves and for our organizations? While there are no one-size-fits-all recipes for these foundational questions, the Leaders Agenda podcast provides great perspective and actionable wisdoms from the very best leaders of our time. Today's guest is Tom Polen, the CEO and President of Becton, Dickinson and Company, or BD, a global medical technology company advancing the world of health. Tom took over as the CEO of BD last year, just as the global pandemic was starting. You can imagine that challenge, and we'll hear more about that. But we'll also explore Tom's vision for the future, not only for BD, but his insights as to what does the world of health look like beyond the pandemic, and what does it mean for healthcare companies such as BD. And finally, we'll explore what has made Tom the leader that he is today, and some of the learnings from his career, as well as those things from his upbringing and personal life that really define who he is as a leader. Here is our conversation. Tom Polen, I am so excited to have you with me in the Leaders Agenda today. You are in New Jersey, and of course we all know you are the new CEO and chairman of BD. Welcome.
Great to be here. Always wonderful to see you, Ty.
I love having this opportunity to talk with you. Everyone pretty much knows BD by now, I'm pretty sure. But just in case some of our listeners don't know what BD is all about as a company, we'll talk quite a bit about BD a little bit later in this podcast. But can you just give us a quick synopsis of BD?
Sure. We're an amazing team of about 73,000 associates around the world. About 60% of our associates or of our sales are in the U.S., 40% outside of the U.S., a very global organization. We've been around nearly 125 years and have one of the largest medical device companies, medical technology companies on the planet. And I think we really saw that come to life and on display in full force through the COVID pandemic, where, as an example, our life science business was a leader in COVID diagnosis, both molecular, and one of the first companies in the world to develop a 15-minute rapid test that changed the paradigm for how quickly COVID could be diagnosed. Then our medical segment, which is a leader in medical technologies typically used in hospitals, touched the lives of 90% of all patients that ended up in an ICU. In fact, 90% of anyone that ends up in a hospital will be touched by BD products. And certainly those being treated for COVID were no exception. And then now, as vaccination campaigns are being rolled out through the world, BD's providing, we're the world's leader in syringes. And so we've actually now have commitments to deliver 2 billion vaccines, COVID vaccines around the world using our drug delivery devices. And so while we've had a long storied impact on helping combat a full range of diseases and conditions around the world, certainly the most recent, one of the most significant healthcare crises of the last century, certainly has been a great example of what we bring to bear in helping advance care around the world.
Thanks for that. And we're going to come back to the PD strategy and some of the innovation a little bit later. But, as from a Leaders Agenda perspective, I'm really interested in the story of you as the leader. And so before we get into some of the more professional career elements of it, there's a story about you from when you were quite young that was a significant event in your life that I think I've heard you say has really shaped the way that not just your life, but also your career. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. I know that's something you and I've talked as we've known each other for, I think, well over a decade.
Yeah.
Everyone, we all come with our own personal stories and experiences. And so one that shaped my life was I grew up in the countryside in the eastern shore of Maryland, really surrounded by farmland and dirt road. And my family had moved from Washington, D.C. area when I was very young, less than 5, to raise us. And so it was just us out there in that area. And so one morning, my father worked. My mother was a nursery school teacher and was helping us get ready for school, myself when I was 13, and my sister would have been about 10. And I still remember very clearly her helping me finish breakfast and then indicating that her arm felt numb and then suddenly collapsing in front in a seizure. As come to find out, by the end of the day, we had understood that she had a massive brain aneurysm and passed away right there in front of us. And had been very completely healthy up until that point, and just something that happens in life. Probably had a vessel that was weak, that was born with, and just had a sudden brain aneurysm. So obviously that had a tremendous impact. Now, as my father, looking at what he was going to do from a career perspective to raise my sister and I as a single dad, not that we ever had a lot of money. We grew up again in a 1,400 square foot house in a dirt road in the middle of the country. But as I think about how that shaped my life, it did so in many ways. First off, I started working right about age 13 to help bring in income for the family. But at the same time, there's lessons I apply to business today that I also learned at that point. And I know one that I think we've talked about and I'm happy to share here is one of our cultural imperatives that I'm focused very much on driving at BD is the idea of servant leadership, right? That leaders, if you think about an organizational pyramid, we're at the bottom of the pyramid. Everything that's important happens above us with our associates, with our frontline sales team, and ultimately with our customers who are at the top. And we're here to serve and support their success. And as I look back, actually, all the way back when I was 13, I still remember, again, very clearly, a moment where, in that case, my dad's boss, he was an engineer with the Big Bell telephone company. That was before the breakup back in those days. Gives a sense of maybe how old I am. But he was doing some travel. My mother was 35, so was my father at the time when she passed. So he was still very active in his career and seeking to move up. He was an engineer that would design phone systems for companies like BD. And he had to go to his boss and say, look, my priorities in my life have changed. I need to stop traveling. I need to focus on raising my family. And I'd love to stay with the company, but I can't do what I'm doing. And in that case, a leader who said, let me find a way to keep getting the best out of someone who's very talented, but can't do what they're doing. He ended up finding a way, creating a role for my dad at that point in time. It stopped. It was the last role that he ever had. He kept that role for well over a decade afterwards because he couldn't move into other spots given what his priorities had become. And obviously I learned a lot about fatherhood and setting the right values in life from my dad from that perspective. But he also learned a lot about his boss at the time. And that's someone that if someone were to ask me tell me a leader who you have a lot of respect for, that's a leader that I have a lot of respect for. In that case, he was a servant leader who served his team. My dad would go through brick walls for him for the rest of his life. He was extremely loyal to the Big Bell phone company for what they did in his life and gave everything he could to make them successful. I think that's a great example of servant leadership. And that's an example of a leader that I don't even know what his name is today. I couldn't tell you that. For some reason, I haven't pictured as like a short person with no hair. He probably is 6'5" and has a long mane. But that's a lesson that I learned early in life that still sticks with me today.
He made an impact on not just your father's life, but on your life. Quite a big impact, which is amazing. I have to ask you another question about that experience. And of course, you know that I'm also a brain aneurysm survivor and nearly died. And it's a difficult thing to go through for the family. I have 2 sons. They were adults at the time when that happened. But emotionally, How were you able to sort of deal with that at such a young age? And has that been an influence on your own emotional makeup, sort of how you work through grief and those types of things in your life now as an adult?
Yeah. I think for anyone who goes through a challenge, a significant challenge in their life, it certainly shapes their mindset that they're going to have for the rest of their time. And a number of things probably influence. One is a real recognition on what the term life is short means, right? When I
Yes.
turned 35, that you kind of reflect and say, you outlived your parent at 35, and who knows what can happen in the future. Really make the best of the time that you have. We're very fortunate to be able to be in an industry where we have a saying at BD that we're fortunate enough to be able to do our life's work through our work life. And that's true, right? Our whole purpose is advancing the world of health. That's why I got into healthcare, was actually from that experience. And over the next 24 hours, as my mom went through shock trauma, et cetera, and realized this could be done, this can be better, and wanted to make a difference. I first wanted to be a physician, was applying to medical school, and then ended up joining a startup company that kind of never looked back on heading down the business path, but always with the goal of making healthcare better, which is a passion of mine. So it certainly left an impact on the industry that I got into. But I think the other thing in terms of how one thinks beyond make the most of the time that you have, and maybe a little impatient in wanting to make progress that comes along with that, is also recognition that when you are in challenges that you have in front of you, that you always keep them in perspective. Right? That you've been, when you go through tough times, other times are always relative. My wife happens to be a cancer surgeon and is typically the physician that's telling patients that they have cancer. And again, understanding situations that other people have that they have to have those conversations on a daily basis. In most cases in business, there's tough conversations that have to be had. Maybe you have to restructure, or you have to make a change in a leader, or you need to make a tough decision on a product. But the relative toughness of those decisions or those situations that exist, it helps keep things in perspective, right? And
yes, yeah, absolutely.
Get the decisions made and move on.
So let's then talk about another crisis. That was the time in your career that was going to be the first year of becoming the CEO of BD and really taking the company to its new journey for BD 2025, I think, as you talk about the strategy. That was just starting out, and then the pandemic hit. The rest is history. I mean, we've heard a lot of different things about the pandemic, but one of the things that I've heard you say, and I quote, and I'm going to read this so I get it right: "Crisis doesn't create character; it reveals it." What did it reveal to you? What has this pandemic revealed to you about yourself, your own character, but also others within BD, your leadership team, for instance?
Yeah. I think that saying can't be more true, and it tested the whole world in terms of what was the real character of an organization or of a person or of a country, and how they responded in that crisis. And again, I truly do believe that crisis doesn't build character, but it's a tremendous opportunity to reveal character. And for BD, it was a tremendous catalyst for our strategy. So as you described, I'd just taken the role essentially at the beginning of February as CEO of the company. And we've outlined our 2025 vision and strategy, which was focused around accelerating growth through new innovation that would transform healthcare, simplifying what is now a large organization, making it easier to do business with, making it easier to get work done, removing waste so that we can reinvest more in new innovations that help patients, and evolving our culture in a way that empowered our organization to achieve those goals. And so first off, when the pandemic hit, our strategy didn't change, right? That was our true north, that if anything, we absolutely accelerated our strategy because of COVID. It allowed us to focus very narrowly on advancing that strategy. and utilize what became a crisis that we had to respond to. We have, again, we're one of the leaders in infectious disease diagnostics. We're one of the leaders in providing solutions to ICUs and hospitals to help treat patients. And we are the world leader in delivering vaccines. Literally, we were needed in this pandemic in a way that we're built to do. We make almost 50 billion medical devices a year. And so we also have the capability to scale things at a rate that's quite unique in the industry. And this is a situation in a pandemic where things were needed at scale that had never been needed at scale before. There's not many companies who can say we're going to make an extra 2 billion vaccine delivery devices on top of the 7 billion that we normally make in a year. But we have the ability to do that. And in fact, we're doing that. So it allowed us to hyper focus on advancing that and advance a number of our cultural imperatives. And that a couple of our imperatives were, two of our imperatives specifically were strong teams, empowering strong teams. Companies at the end of the day, they thrive and they succeed by empowering associates to solve complex problems independently, particularly if you're a large company, right? That's how you remove bureaucracies. You're empowering your teams to solve complex problems, could be innovation problems to help address a customer issue or a patient challenge, or solve a problem that is creating waste in a company and helping you be more efficient. And to do that, you need strong teams. And to do that really well, you need a speak up culture as well, which is when you're solving complex problems, there's always can be issues. And maybe we want to make sure that if someone sees a quality issue with one of our products or sees something that we're going down a wrong path on an R&D program, that someone can raise their hand and speak up a couple of weeks early, that makes a big difference. And so we're driving a speak up culture as well. And so this became a tremendous opportunity for us because the call to action was very, very real. So I'll share an example. Typically, it takes us about 3 years to develop a rapid test to say, identify a patient with flu or strep. And here, COVID came, and the world was suddenly, we had launched a PCR test, molecular test, and we were hearing and all reading in the news, it was taking a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks to get your test result back. And that just wasn't helping stop the spread of COVID in the way that was needed. We were one of the leaders in rapid testing, which is our device about the size of a cell phone and allows you to diagnose an infectious disease in less than 15 minutes. And so we know we needed a test for COVID on that platform. It's called Veritor. And we also knew it couldn't take us 3 years. So we set out a challenge to say, how can we develop it in less than 3 months? And we normally would make about 8 million tests on that platform a year in a typical year, mostly for testing for flu. And we said, not only do we need to develop that test in 3 months when we've never done it in less than 3 years, instead of making 8 million tests in a year, we need to make 12 million tests every month.
Oh my goodness.
From the time we launch. And we have 90 days to scale up to that as we concurrently develop the test. And so for a 125-year-old company, that forces you to test that strong teams, empowered group, really empower them in whole new ways to take risk, because that's the only way you're going to make that radical of a change in what it traditionally happens. And then to be able to have to speak up very quickly, because every day matters, right? We were flying reagents around on our plane to save a day, to get reagents from university labs in Europe or in the US or in other parts of the world and get them to our research centers and our scientists, accelerating, getting raw materials from manufacturing partners to get them to our test site to be able to validate those reagents as we were developing different combinations and testing which combinations of tests work best in detecting COVID to get the most accurate diagnostic test at the end of the day. And so, we saw that team and many other teams across the company really be forced to thrive and take those cultural values that I was hoping we would develop over several years and advance them almost overnight. And now it's been a point of sharing those stories and maintaining a lot of the progress that we not naturally had happened during COVID. And I couldn't be more proud of the organization, and the organization's proud of itself. Proud to be BD is a very common phrase that's said inside the company. And the stories that were created during COVID on what we can do when we put our mind to it, along the lines of those cultural imperatives that we had put out before COVID, but we advanced in a whole new way because of COVID.
Yeah.
We're gonna keep that progress. I'm convinced of that. It's going to make us a much better company as a result.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because I think that's a really important lesson for a lot of us, in no matter which industry, but certainly in our own industry, because medtech is actually known for too long time to market, for instance, if we're looking at cycle time of product development projects. So we've had initiatives going on for years now trying to really shorten that, and not just time to market, but time to impact, so that we still maintain that high quality. You said we were willing to take more risk in this, and we had to take more risk. I mean, we had a, and you, I'm sure, also put in some other levers then that that understood that, so that when you take more risk in the product development process, you need to do more things also knowing that once the product is out, and continue to study and improve things. But how do you see taking the learning from the risk-taking perspective, but also from an really coming together and being very focused on what's most important? How do you see taking that learning and incorporating that into your day-to-day practice across all product lines, and being able to really make it repeatable?
Yeah, but we've done a couple of things. So first off, beyond that product development specific example, the COVID pandemic caused us to hyper-focus on the few things that mattered as an organization. And we started then weekly meetings that I have with my leadership team that we continue today, and we will always continue those weekly reviews with my leadership team on what we call our top 10 needle movers, which is in a company, nearly $20 billion of revenue, 70-some thousand associates. What are the 10 things that we need to get done that are really going to move the needle for the organization? And I publish that every quarter. We update that because some of them we achieve in a quarter, and then we add in, okay, what do we need to do this next quarter that's really going to move the needle out of all the different things going on in the company? What are the 10 things we really have to get done that will really change the trajectory of the organization when successful? So that hyper focus is something we put in place during COVID that we're going to continue as a business practice. In that same spirit, if we take that down a level, that hyper focus within the business of we need to get a COVID assay out. So every business has their top 10 needle movers as well. And when you really look at what made that successful, there's 2 or 3 factors that we learned that we continue to apply. So the first is on those few things that as you identify and you get hyper-focused on the few things that matter, make sure that you're taking the best talent from across the company, putting them on those few things that matter. And in this case, we did exactly that. So we said, this is not a life science diagnostic business unit program. This is a BD company-wide program, and every resource of our 70,000 associates and our billions of dollars of assets will be applied to make sure that we can make this happen. And as an example, we were looking at who is the best commercial leader. We took them from a totally separate business unit that was focused on vascular disease, not diagnostics at all. We brought him over to help lead the commercial side. Our best program manager in the organization happened to be a very senior leader who had been promoted into a general manager role in our pharmaceutical systems business, our drug delivery business. He was based in France. And I called him on it was a Friday evening in France. And he actually picked up the phone and I said, how are you doing? And he said, I'm fine. I'm actually sitting outside the lovely cafe on the streets here in France and having a glass of wine with my wife. But I have 5 minutes and I can, if you want to chat. So he said, what are you looking for? You normally don't call me at night on a Friday. And so I said, well, what I'd like to ask you is, would you be willing to come take on and be the program leader for this really critical program for BD and for the world? You're the best that we've got in the company at this, and we could really use you taking a leadership role in this. And I need you in San Diego to do this. Would you consider it? I said, well, let me talk to my wife about it. We're right here, and just tell when are you thinking I would start? I said, well, it's Friday. I'm thinking the BD plane would be to pick you up on Sunday and you'll be in San Diego on Monday.
I knew this. Monday. Okay.
So, and he called me back in about an hour and said, I'm on. Let me get to San Diego and make an impact. And so more of the story is there, put your best people.
Yeah.
And that was a huge part. Then we talk about taking risk. Make sure that one of the things we learned is the power of removing risk from a team and enabling them to be their best. So we made it very clear early on that the risks that the team were taking were going to be taken by the company and not by them as individuals. Right? So, for example, when you're developing a rapid test, one of the first things is you have to have an antibody that detects the organism of interest, in this case, COVID, and does so at a very high affinity level. And the better the antibody you get, the more sensitive of the test you can get. And so here you have a new organism that's new to the world. And so we started hunting the globe for who has the best antibody that can be put in a rapid test. And so we worked with everyone from DARPA in the US, putting us in contact with researchers in the US, to working with universities throughout Europe and Asia, and flying in dozens and dozens of antibodies and screening them at one of our research centers to figure out which one could be the best. And it's very cheap to get a little bit of antibody. It becomes very expensive to get a lot of antibody. Mm-hmm. You need a little bit of antibody to do development work. You need a lot of antibody to actually scale up and make 12 million tests a month.
Right.
And so once we started honing in on a few antibodies, typically you'd say, well, let's make sure we get the right antibody, and then let's order a lot of it to make it. And that making a lot of it takes about a month for the antibody manufacturing to happen. Well, that's a lot of time in the middle of a pandemic. And so as an example, when we started getting close and believing that we had the right antibody, but before we would normally buy large quantities of it, which cost a couple $1 million, we said, just go ahead and buy it. And if it doesn't work, we'll throw it away. And we ended up throwing away the first, group of antibody ended up not working as well. And we threw that away. But the team knew that it had the full support of the company. The risk wasn't on the team if it didn't work out. It was a bet that we were making as a company, and that allowed them to be their best and to use. And these are extremely talented scientists and researchers who had the resources of the company, the best talent of the company, and had could take appropriate risks to get something out that we needed at the highest quality, which is what patients deserve and need. So those are just a couple learnings that we continue to apply the right way as we think about continuing to be accelerated in innovation. We'll never be able to get, I hope we will never be in another pandemic that requires us to get tests out that fast. And obviously regulators around the world also supported much accelerated approval times that we won't have outside of that. So 3 months will not be the norm, but I'd like to think we can do a little bit better than 3 years.
Okay, we'll keep measuring what that cycle time is as we go forward. For I'm sure in a lot of companies, in fact, this is a huge learning, and it will change also how we look at our processes and practices and decision making and governance and all of those things, which kind of then brings me to a larger question beyond COVID. You've been very focused on putting a clear strategy in place for BD. And of course, COVID changed some of the focus in terms of where you put your resources and the immediate attention. But you also work in a lot of other spaces. What do you feel are the most significant trends that we should pay attention to right now if we in medtech or life sciences? And what are the ones that you yourself are already incorporating into the next generation of PD innovation?
Sure. First, I think I've been in the industry 20 plus years, and there's never been a more exciting time when it comes to innovation and the opportunities to impact and improve patient care than there is right now. And we're certainly at the forefront of that work. And as we look ahead and we think 10 years from now, I think the med tech impacts will be at a whole nother level than they even are today, which are quite tremendous. And we're on full display of the need and the power of medical technology during the COVID crisis. Yeah. But for us, as we think about, there's probably three major trends that I would focus on that are macro forces that are reshaping healthcare today and will continue to reshape healthcare over the next decade. And that's really the power of smart devices and artificial intelligence and informatics. I'll put robotics in that category to reshape fundamental healthcare processes and improve the quality of those processes, the cost of those processes, and the outcome for patients of those processes. So for us, for example, we're applying smart devices and AI and robotics to help transform and improve the medication management process. When you're in a hospital, getting medication safely, timely is really important to patient outcomes, eliminating medication errors and ensuring those therapies are accurate and safe. That's something that we're advancing quite significantly through applying those, reinventing it. Microbiology labs, another area that have been relatively unchanged for 100 years. Now you go in the BD microbiology lab that we're selling today is a fully automated robotic system that's utilizing artificial intelligence to read bacterial growth and is accelerating the time to results, where we can get results to patients a day or two faster because of this technology. With less staff is very hard to find today. We can help labs still navigate in lower staff environments because we're utilizing AI to supplement expertise and get more work done with less staff where staff isn't available. So those are some examples that are transforming care in our spaces in that theme. The second major theme that macro force that's reshaping healthcare is the care shift that's happening from hospitals to non-acute settings. And obviously COVID has accelerated and made that more visible as virtual visits became the norm when people couldn't leave their homes. But even as we're coming out of it, some of that is sticking at a much faster rate than it would have. And it was already moving in that direction pre-COVID, but it got hyper shifted because of COVID. And so whether or not it's moving all the way to the home or moving into an ambulatory surgery center or moving into a long-term care facility or moving into a retail facility where now people can go get primary care, there's whole new categories of technology that are being rethought and reshaped to better operate in those new environments. There's companies working to create ICUs that can be in your home, not in a hospital, for example, or collecting blood in a retail center without the need for an experienced phlebotomist, as an example, or collect your blood yourself and send it in, which isn't something that's commonly done today. So that whole shift from acute to non-acute is certainly reshaping healthcare. And then the last one is chronic disease, improving outcomes in chronic disease. The majority of healthcare spend exists today in chronic disease. As you look around the world, it wasn't that long ago that it was infectious disease was the largest cause of death and mortality, morbidity around the world. Today, it's chronic disease, cancer, kidney disease, diabetes, etc. And there's amazing new technologies in material science, again, in AI and informatics, in robotics, in different technologies that are allowing whole new shifts in improving outcomes for patients with chronic disease. And I'm really optimistic around how we'll be transforming outcomes in patients with chronic disease in the years ahead.
So, and in some ways, would you agree that in some ways the technology is almost already ahead of us? In the capabilities out there, we haven't been able to yet totally harness them and make them into the solutions that we need or want. And one of the challenges that I see a lot in companies is to be able to upgrade capabilities inside. So you're talking about different things here, such as AI, robotics. Now you're looking at very different skill sets also. So just a few minutes ago, you were telling the story of COVID and how you brought some of the best from your company together in that area. What are some of the new capabilities that you really have to now develop, because they may not exist? They're not the basic science. They may be data management. They may be all these different things that may come even from a different domain.
Sure. And I think you're right. There's certainly some, we call that the R and the D, as you do as well. And on the R side, there certainly is some that we're doing on new polymer technologies or material sciences that are still advancing. particularly more sustainable materials is an area of real opportunity to still develop. They're not yet available today, but we're heavily vested and focused in that area as well. But a lot of, when it comes to smart devices, for example, and informatics and AI, a lot of that is not a technology risk as much as putting the pieces together, because it's been done in other areas. And it's around understanding how your solution is going to work in a customer environment and taking different systems, right? I can think of a new technology we're using for infusion that uses a sonar technology with a informatics technology, with a connectivity, interoperability technology to a hospital's electronic medical record, with some injection technology. All those technologies exist, but it's combining them together, system engineering, to make it work fluidly. And then from a human factor, how do you make these complex technologies seamless and easy to use, like the extremely complex technology that's in your iPhone that you don't even think about? That's just the user interface is so beautiful that it becomes ubiquitous and easy to use. Those are it's always been a part of the medical device industry, but it's never been more important than it is today. And the demand for those skill sets is very high. So we spend a lot of time actually on training in system engineers and building those skill sets. I think obviously the other area is informatics and data scientists. So if you look back 7 years ago, we had very few of those capabilities in BD. Today, we have over 2,000 software engineers and data scientists in the company working in our R&D organization, which has made a huge impact on the types of products that we're developing today.
And I'm assuming that the other thing that's changing is we're getting closer and closer to the patient. When we're thinking about the front end of innovation and also the sort of the iteration as we develop different products, a lot of the input needs to come directly from the patient, no longer just from the KOLs or the providers or the surgeons. How do you get closer to patients? I mean, patient centricity is one more thing, I think, in life sciences. We've talked about this for a long, long time. But the question is, how do you really do it well? It's not just the job of the marketing. How do you do it well?
Yeah, certainly our marketing, but our R&D teams are right out in the front lines. It's not uncommon at all that we're in patient homes observing and watching how they're utilizing and engaging with our products on a daily basis, or that we're in a hospital. Every day we're in hospitals and healthcare systems. Our R&D scientists and our marketing teams and other members of our organization observing firsthand. I can think of a story that I was out with one of our businesses just last week, and they were in patient homes watching interaction with one of our new products. This was a business whose products had mostly been used in the hospital before. They'd actually just launched last year their first at-home product that's being used by patients at their bedside. And so they were observing how the patients were cleaning the device. And as an example, they were realizing they were putting them in their dishwasher to wash at the end of which. It's a reusable. It's perfectly fine to do this. It's not a sterile device, but it needs to be cleaned. And they learned that there's different ways that they need to redesign the product to make it easier to use in that environment, because no one had thought historically that this would be cleaned in a dishwasher. So that's just an example that as you move into these new care settings, the importance of being out on the front lines routinely, seeing how the products are in use, and then taking that feedback and serially iterating and improving them. And we're launching a product later this year that actually makes that product better, Gen 2, and incorporates some features that are going to make it really easy and better when put into the dishwasher.
And you can put it in the dishwasher. Excellent. Okay, so let's switch gears for just a little bit, and I want to go back to the cultural elements. You have talked already about the importance of empowerment and really bringing the culture forward to a speak-up culture. And the other kind of a hot topic that we've experienced across all industries in the last year has been inclusion, and really thinking about cultures in a different manner, even in how we formulate our organizations, how we connect, how we actually also connect with the communities within which we are part of. And I know you've done some amazing work at BD in that area as well. So tell us a little bit about that aspect of BD culture and some of the things that you are currently working on.
Sure. Well, we're really extremely proud of the progress that we've been making over the last, we've been making progress for many years, but we really saw a hyper acceleration this past year in terms of our inclusion and diversity and the progress that we made, not only in the ranks of our executive team and management levels throughout the organization, but in our culture and inclusiveness of our culture. And part of that, there was a moment last year that I remember very clearly, which was after the George Floyd tragedy and the social call to action on racial injustice. And it was at the same time that, as of course, not that long before, as I had taken over as CEO, I had started a significant focus on the company on building that speak up culture that I described earlier as one of our key cultural imperatives. And so as BD is, as I mentioned, we're a 125 almost year-old company. We do not have a history of taking positions on social issues. We've been relatively quiet. Many people don't know who BD is. Becton Dickinson, who stayed below the radar as a medical company. And so we had an inflection on, do we continue that or do we become more vocal here? And as I reflected at that time, I remember sitting in my office and realizing, you know what, Tom, if you're asking associates in the organization to speak up when they see something that's wrong, something wrong on a quality issue or wrong on an R&D project, or just some way that we can be doing better, right? We expect, Tom, you're standing in front of the 70,000 associates saying, I expect you to stand up when you see something that's not right in the company. You need to speak up and you need to listen up and we need to act on that. What do we do in this case when we see something that's wrong? In this case, racial injustice, it's impacting our community. And so I saw those two as linked completely, and that it was really very important for us to change our position historically and go out on the offensive publicly to stand against racial injustice and make it very clear across our organization and to the communities in which we exist that where BD stands on that. Both, again, in the communities which we exist, and we're in a lot of communities around the world and can influence those, but also within the company. And we talk about that very openly, right? Speak up doesn't just mean inside of BD, but BD is going to speak up on issues that impact our community and what's important to our community. And so, we've used that to not only help advance inclusion and diversity in the company, but really I'll call that holistic to our core set of values and who we are. And they do go together.
It takes courage to speak up. So there's two things that I want to kind of talk about on that one just a little deeper. That decision to speak up as a company and to take a stance, that's a courageous decision and could in fact also impact in some cases the business. Have you seen an impact to the business from that decision? Have you seen an external impact on external response to that decision?
Well, we've only seen an extremely positive impact of that. I mean, the engagement of our associates and the pride in which associates have of being part of an organization that they know we have a common set of values and we will always live that common set of values. It's not just right. It's not what you say, it's what you do. And that we do what we say and we say what we do and that there's no daylight in between. I think the other thing we look at, we just finished, we often do voice of associate surveys as most companies do. And as you know, over the last decade, associate engagement has been kind of the key metric that people look at and associate it with how well you'll be performing, how engaged your teams will be, the turnover rates in your organization. And today, as is all over the news, there's a labor shortage in many parts of the world, talent shortage. There's a big war on talent. We've been doing quite well at retaining our best talent. And part of that gets to the culture that people are proud to be in. And we've started shifting from an engagement metric. Actually, the survey we just did, we were very focused on belonging. And I think that's a result of a bit of COVID and a bit of what's happening in society. There's a lot of data coming out that the real question that starts being the key indicator for performance, retention, getting the best out of your organization is actually the answer to the question of belonging, right? How well do I feel I belong in the organization? And that gets to, so first off, if people that feel like that feel passionate, this is where I belong. You start going back to our cultural values of strong teams. We want strong teams. You can imagine people who feel like they belong are stronger on a team and perform better.
Absolutely.
Places that are inclusive and diverse, where people can be who they are and be the best that they can be, there's a much higher sense of belonging in those environments and organizations. And obviously retention is higher in places where they just say, this is where I feel I belong. And obviously our purpose is huge there too, right? I belong making an impact in advancing the world of health.
Exactly.
And it's doing that.
And I would say that actually that is partly at the core of the psychological safety as well that we're talking about, right? So for me to belong, I need to feel accepted, first of all. But I also want to be able to make that difference, make that contribution, and be safe in being able to do that, to bring my own ideas into the mix and really feel like I can make an impact. So one thing we know about psychological safety in organizations that it because it's so much about taking that personal risk, interpersonal risk, it lives inside the local leadership quite a bit. So the local leaders impact that. Do you have any advice for organizations who say we really want to be focusing on psychological safety as one of the key factors of our organization, but we are a very large organization? How do we make sure that penetrates through all the different layers? Any advice on that one?
Yeah, it's a great topic. It's that gets back to, we call it speak up culture from that perspective of psychological safety, that people feel safe to speak up and share again when they see something that's not right or see something that can be done better in the organization. And a couple things. One, it's making sure that leaders are listening up, because people won't keep speaking up if they don't feel that people are listening and acting upon that. And so sharing stories when that's happening, sharing stories on where someone spoke up and resulted in a significant improvement. We do that quite a bit, right? That's around setting the examples for others to live by. That's something that we spend a lot of time on. We've been training our leaders on speak up and how to engage with their organization. That fits with servant leadership as well, too, right? Servant leadership is about it's about supporting your team. And it goes in a loop, right, of also empowering your team, which is the other area of our strategy, to make their own decisions, to take their own action, because sometimes it's when you see something, go fix it. Don't speak up. You
don't have
to ask about it yourself too, right? You don't have to ask. They all go hand in hand in that as well. And that people know they're there to support their teams in doing the right thing and taking action. All of that is integrated in a very clear way. And so we're really pleased with how we've been advancing our culture. Actually, our latest associate survey that we did just a week ago, I saw the results, and we advanced our culture in a meaningful way over the last year. And I have no doubt that we'll continue to do that.
That's wonderful. So I'm conscious of our time, so I know we're going to start wrapping up here a little bit. But you did start with this this theme of life is short, and life is very short. You're a very busy person. It's a very large company, and we just heard all the different things that you've been doing in this past year. How do you keep yourself healthy, and where do you find, how do you feel that you are able to keep your spirit also in that place of being able to inspire yourself and others? Sure. Do you have a magical solution for that?
There's nothing magical, certainly, that I have that everyone else doesn't have the same same thing. And lots of people I'm sure I can learn from as well in that. And I always am looking to learn from others and how to best balance, because it's not easy, right? There's no magic secret to work-life balance and getting everything just in the right optimal equation. But for me, what I find is that I have three very clear priorities from a life perspective. And I focus my energy and my time very purposely in those three areas. And that's topics that we've talked about here on this call, which is leading BD and making an impact for our patients that we serve, our associates and our shareholders. And I put all my a large amount of energy behind making that successful. And I'm passionate about that. Our purpose is advancing the world of health, and it's a virtuous cycle. We do well by doing good. We deliver additional growth and value to our patients. We do well for our shareholders. And it's an exciting space that we're in, as I said before, right? There's never been a more exciting time in med tech. The other two areas are my family and making sure that I'm spending time. I've got my kids and they're in key periods of high school and middle school, and spending my time with them, making sure that when I get home, my focus and attention is with my family, and I may open up my laptop and do work. When everyone is winding down in the evening, I'll get back at it. But that window between when I get home and that wind down period is time with them. And the same thing on the weekends, et cetera. So making that time very clear. And then the last one is taking time for myself. I do strongly believe that you've got to take care of yourself, or you're not going to have energy for the other two priorities. And so I make sure I get to the gym on a routine basis, or my passion and kind of one of my happy places is out on the trail running. I do a lot of recreational and competitive trail running. Is kind of something I love, just being out in nature, running as fast as you can down a narrow, rocky trail. And obviously that's healthy for you as well. So it kills two birds with one stone. But taking that time for yourself, not only in the spirit of longevity, but in the spirit of giving you the energy to be your best in the other categories that are important to you. I think. So
do you build that into your schedule? So if I look at your weekly schedule, do I see your trail time there?
You would see it this evening at a certain time on my way home. Yes, after my last meetings of the day.
And you can say no to other things to be able to, so you'll keep to it. You'll say no
every weekend, and I say, okay, I need to get to do exercise. This number I need to do it 5 or 6 times days this week. And here's my schedule for the week. And then I will fill in when I can fit it in based on my work and my family commitments that I have on my schedule. Where can I fit in that number of exercises, that number of days? Sometimes I'm gonna have to do it in the morning. Sometimes I'm gonna have to do it at night, but I know when I'm gonna do it every weekend for the next week, and I schedule it out. Whether or not I'm traveling or I'm here, I find a way to make sure I fit it in, and I schedule it just like I would a meeting.
I think that's really great, and thank you for sharing that. Healthy habits matter. Healthy habits matter at work. Healthy habits matter outside of work, and taking care of our own health, I believe, is the only way by which we can help others. So that's really important. I'm going to end with one last question. If you could go back and meet that 13-year-old boy today, what would you say to him?
It's a good question. I mean, obviously at that point that, again, life is short, and just stay focused on moving through things. I think the lesson that you learn in that point is no matter how challenging of a time that you're in, that time will pass, and just keep that in perspective. And, I learned as a result, tough times that people are in, and many people are in tough times in their life, those times will pass, and they can be better as a result of having gone through them in some way at the end of it, and take learnings from whatever the situation that one is in. So maybe that's probably what I would say.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Leaders Agenda podcast. You can continue the conversation with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter by following Action for Results.